heart will take care of you. In the book of Matthew, the 19th chapter, the Lord was being tempted by individuals as they came to him. And in verse 3 it says, the Pharisees came to him, tempting him, saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Beautiful passage. You know, I mentioned, this is from a lesson I preached over in Eudora, and I mentioned then that I actually meant to bring a couple of baseballs with me. My son has a baseball that was signed in 1985 by the Royals. And if you're a baseball fan, you know that's a pretty special year. They won the World Series. So I was going to bring that, and then I was going to bring another one and point out the other one is one that I find time to time out in the field out there, and as I'm mowing, I have to stop and pick it up along with soccer balls and footballs and frisbees and everything else. It's just left out there, and it's just an old baseball. You can write on it, scribble on it, throw it against the wall. But that other one, you wouldn't want to do that. It's special. It was the year they won the World Series. So it was a special ball, and we look at that and we know there are things likely in your home. You know, we have at our house, our kids today decided to build a tent city. So downstairs they found every blanket they could imagine. And they brought it in there and they had things stacked, and it's a pretty neat thing. I hadn't got in it yet, but I plan to this evening. But in those blankets, you won't really find, there's a couple of quilts that Lana has that her father, he didn't realize the value in them, and he thought they were old and worn out. Well, they're over 100-year-old handmade quilts made by her grandmother and I don't know who else. But they're special. And whenever we attach something to a loved one, to some special event, then we look at that we have and we handle it a little bit different. It requires a special handling. Well, whenever we look, we see that God expects us to do the same thing. God wants us to look and to see that there are things that are from Him, and they ought to be treated in a special way. In the book of Matthew, the 15th chapter, you find where the Lord is giving a strong rebuke to the Jews of that day because they taught for doctrines the commandments of men. You know how they were able to do that? Jesus said, In vain do you worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. But He described their attitude. They draw nigh with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In other words, the doctrine of God that they had no trouble in perverting and pushing aside, they just had lip service to God. They didn't look at it really as something that was tied to Him. They, as a matter of fact, had more pride in what their fathers had spoken and done. But God wanted them and us to realize the value of that word as a whole. In the book of Luke, the 6th chapter, Jesus asked the question, Why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? In other words, you look at me, you proclaim me to be Lord, and yet your actions don't show it. So you say that you have this attachment to me, this standing in awe of me as to who I am, but you're not following through. So there was a disconnect between their true relationship. They didn't look at what He said as something that deserved special handling. Bring that over to the family. You look and You see, a man years ago, he wrote a book called Family and Civilization. And he studied the civilizations, the decline of civilizations, and he looked at the family beside that, and he started examining the teachings, the practices of these civilizations that just went into a spiral. And he found 8 things that were common amongst those civilizations he studied. Marriage lost its sacredness and was frequently broken by divorce. The traditional meaning of the marriage and the ceremony was lost. Feminist movements abounded. Increased public disrespect for parents and authority in general was seen. The acceleration of juvenile delinquency, promiscuity, and rebellion was evident. Refusal of the people with traditional marriages to accept family responsibilities became prominent. There was a growing desire and acceptance of adultery. And there was the increasing interest and spread of sexual perversion and sex-related crimes. Now you'd think, you said years ago, that's probably what, 2 years ago? That was 1947. But he studied civilizations and cultures long before that. You see, you remember Yogi Berra? He used to have all these signs, their sayings rather, and one of them was, it's deja vu all over again. You might have to study deja vu if you've never heard of it to understand what he was saying and how silly it is. But the thing is, everything is happening over. The writer in Ecclesiastes pointed out there's nothing new under the sun. In other words, this man studied and he found out we face the same problems that they did in that time. So we look and we see the dangers around us. I mean, you look and you see what is happening to today's society. The home is happening. If good things are happening, the home is happening. If bad things are happening, the home is happening. The home is declining. And we see the fruit of it all around us. So what are we going to do? You know, we look, and those of us tonight, I mean, you know, the Sunday night crowd, you're the ones that are serious about Christianity, aren't you? You're the ones that look, and you look for more opportunity to serve God, to worship God, to give Him what's due. Well, God, He wants more than just our time here. And one of the things He wants is our family. And so what we're to do, we have to be the generation. If you don't see it before in your family, hopefully you do, but if you don't, we have to be the ones that stand up and say, this is God's will. This is the home that He deserves, that society deserves, that the church deserves, and that me and my family deserve. And I'm going to be the one. Well, remember the baseballs? We can handle our families like that ball that is pitched out in the yard, covered with grass, stuck under the fence, or wherever it may be found. Or we can be the one that you put in a little plastic cover because it deserves special handling. What's your family? What's mine? Well, you look in Matthew 19, and the Lord, He was being tempted. They were trying to entrap Him, but unbeknownst to them, of course, they weren't going to be able to accomplish that. But also what happened was He set forth some things about marriage that are truly astounding that we need to remember, that we always need to be reminded of, and we always need to teach the generations to come about it. For example, you find that God describes marriage, as He spoke here, as a divine institution. In other words, it isn't something that, well, here we are, a bunch of people on this earth. What do we do? Well, why don't we make up some kind of ceremony, and why don't we just join together and call ourselves a family? A lot of people, they'd think that's where it came from. But God pointed out, notice in verse 4 and 5, He says, have you not read that He which made them at the beginning, if you weren't in vacation Bible school, you need to go online and look at the classes. You need to study your Bible and realize that, yeah, there was a beginning. And in that beginning, God did create male and female. Not millions of years later, but on the sixth day of creation. So in the beginning, He made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, shall cleave to his wife, the twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So where did marriage begin? Not in the mind of man, but in the revelation of God. It was God who set forth that first marriage ceremony, you might say, as He revealed through Moses, who wrote this years later. But speaking about that, as Jesus referred to it, that in the beginning He made them male and female, and He told them, this is a union that I have placed you in. You need to understand that. You know, I think it's next Tuesday is J.D. and Polly's anniversary. If not then, it's somewhere in there. It's one of the first tasks that I joined in whenever I moved to Independence, was to join that couple. And I can assure you that they understood that the union they were entering into was made by God. And that in that there were three. Not just J.D. and Polly, and my marriage is not just me and Lana. It is God who joins us. So in a very real sense, there are three in that marriage. And I look then, and that makes me stand in awe, hopefully, that I look at that marriage bond and I see that God has given it. Now, He didn't start the marriage bond and say, you know, I've given it to you, hope it works out. See if you can figure out a way to make this work. I had a woman over in Eudora, had several lessons on the family, and we'll go through several of those in the coming weeks. But she came up to me, and bless her heart, she said, you know, she said, I've made so many mistakes. She said, I wish I'd have heard this before. She said, but I realize there's no excuse. As you've let it be known, God gave the instruction book with the family. And she said, it's my fault that I haven't followed it. Well, marriage, being divine as an institution, we realize that God has done His part. He said, okay, here's what it is. It is a man and a woman that join together. They're joined by me, what therefore God hath joined together, and they are to live it in a certain way. Throughout all time, God has given law. We look today, we look under the new covenant, and we really find more revealed about that, that relationship that is between husband and wife, children and parents, parents and child, brother, sister. I mean, all in all. God gives instructions how this is to be. And so if I look and I realize how precious marriage is, the family as a whole, what am I going to do? I'm going to look and I'm going to find out how to take care of it. Now, I talked about that baseball my son has. I will tell you one thing, if you ever get a chance to look at it, he didn't look, and neither did his daddy, on how to best take care of it. So the ink began to fade. He didn't realize, you needed to protect things in a certain way. Well, as interesting and good as that baseball, it's just a baseball. But the family is much more than that. The baseball was manufactured on this earth. It was signed by a baseball team. Special, but nothing compared to the home. But then you ask, looking at it, if I'm going to protect my home as I should, if I hold it, I say, okay, it is divine institution. It is something that God has made, and I am blessed to be a part of it, me and my spouse. It is amazing. What care do I take? For example, I may go buy a new car. And you make sure, well, I got to change the oil. I need to get it inspected time to time. I need to always check on the brakes. I need to do the proper upkeep. You buy a house. What are you going to do? Well, I need to protect the foundation. I need to make sure the roof is always in good shape. I need to look at the plumbing, the electrical. I need to take care of this because I put a lot into it. What about my home? Not the building over there, but my home. That's a house. I have a home. Do I look and see, delve into? It is so precious because it is from God. What effort am I putting into it to make sure that it is as God would have it? And if I don't do that, have I maybe lost sight that my marriage, my home, is from God? Sobering thought. You know, you watch those TV shows and somebody goes to a garage sale and they see something, a picture, a piece of furniture, whatever, and they buy it for $5, and then they go to Antiques Roadshow and they look at it and say, whoa, this is worth $60,000, $100,000. And yet somebody at some time lost sight of what it was, and it was simply put in a garage sale. Don't need it anymore. Would they have done it if they realized the value? No. Would I let my home, my marriage, decline, go down, if I keep in mind the value of it? I think not. So marriage, it's made by God. It is a divine institution. And God, as He gives it to us, He says, now this is the most important union that you have upon this earth. Now in all things, nothing is more important than seeking God first. Matthew 6:33. The Lord made that plain. This is what we do. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. That's again keeping things in a proper perspective. God has made it, I'm part of it, so I take care of it. But part of taking care of it is realizing that upon this earth, there are a lot of relationships that we hold as precious. You know, I have amazing friends, but they're not my spouse. I was blessed with amazing parents, as was my wife, but they weren't the spouse. Did you catch that in Matthew 19, where He said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, shall cleave to his wife, twain shall be one flesh? Now He's not saying, you know more my father, you know more my mother, I'm not going to treat you. No, you still give honor unto them. But you realize that in this marriage you have entered into a relationship that is superior to that. You know, the joke is always, that whenever, I think it was Lana's dad told me, we believe in marrying off, not marrying on. In other words, you don't come back. Well, he didn't mean that in that way, but he did mean that his daughter shouldn't come running to them every time some little thing went wrong, and I shouldn't go running to my parents every time something went wrong. We were married. We formed that relationship with God joining us, and we had then a bond that put everything else secondary. You ever heard of a home that's destroyed by a workaholic? Well, I remember growing up, my father, and it wasn't by any choice, but I remember times whenever he would work 16 hours a day. But you know what he never did? He never failed to come home and to deal with his family. He always realized that the reason he worked 16 hours a day was for his wife and his children. He had that union with his wife in which, yeah, he labored hard, but if he went out and worked and worked and worked and didn't take care of his family, what was it for? You see, that's why he worked, why he labored. That's why, God says that if a man provides not for his own, the principle is there. He's worse than an infidel. Well, that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and I'm going to work, and forget, and we will talk about later in later lessons, the responsibilities, husband and wife to each other. If I forget that, what is the purpose of working? It isn't just bringing home the physical needs. There is so much more there than paying the rent and buying the groceries. The family is such that it is a union that is so special that I seek God first, and I realize as I do that, yes, I work, I labor in other realms, but I never forget the one to whom I have joined in this union by virtue of God joining me to that person. That's the most important union that I've entered into in this life. And it has to stay there. And then thirdly, I realize that it's unconditional in commitment. Now, the problem is, you look and you see that infidelity is just accepted. But God says you protect this union. In Matthew 19 and verse 6, he says, "What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." And we realize God's desire is such that until death do you part, as most vows have. So until death do you part. Lana, she used to tease me. Well, actually, I'm not sure it was teasing. She said, "I won't be a divorcee." She said, "I might be a widow, but I'm not going to be a divorcee." Now, you figure out what she was telling me there. But the fact is, she realized that this union was such that God desired that we stay together. Romans the 7th chapter, verse 1 and 2, the Apostle Paul there by inspiration sets forth as he is talking about the law. You can't be joined to two laws. You can't be joined to the new covenant and the old covenant. And he gives a parallel. You all know that if a woman is married to a man and yet while he lives she marries another, she's an adulteress. I mean, that's the law. That's the basis that we enter into this into. Now, I have opportunity from time to time to perform weddings. Most folk now, they want somebody younger than an old preacher like me. But I know that all of them, as they're studied with and talked to, they realize that whenever you join together that there has to be this commitment. There have been times whenever, I remember one couple, they called, and it wasn't long after that. I never was one to just perform a wedding for anybody. I always declined generally on any of them, but time to time there would be some that I would agree to because they were associated with somebody else or knew somebody. But I remember one man telling me that whenever they were going to get married, that if it didn't work out, and I said, whoa, I want no part of that. I don't go into it with a plan B in mind. If this is unconditional in commitment, I am determined to make this work. Marriage is something. If you're married, you figured it out. If not, if you ever do get married, you're going to figure it out. It's hard. I mean, you can sit there and say, "Oh, I love you so much. I would never argue with you about." Well, reality comes whenever you find out she squeezes a toothpaste in the middle of all places. That's just a little thing. But differences come. I remember I wasn't a Christian then, and we were around some people, and this man was sitting there talking, and I just overheard him, and he talked about something that his wife did that wasn't serious at all, and he said, "I think it's time to get rid of her and get another one if she's going to do that." And he wasn't joking. I just thought, how horrible. I wasn't even a Christian, and I couldn't imagine looking at marriage like that. And yet that's the way the world does it. If we don't realize that it's made by God, and it is unconditional in commitment, that God says, I want you to stay. I want you to be joined together. We're not going to work at it. Now, sadly, the Lord did go on, and He pointed out there is a circumstance under which a marriage can end. An innocent party who is assaulted, you might say, by the adultery committed by their spouse can, doesn't have to, God still wants that to work out if possible, but can put that spouse away for fornication and be married again. The innocent party can, that party can't. John talked about that a little bit in class this morning. One man, one woman for life. Only exception by which you can divorce and remarry is adultery, in which an innocent party puts a guilty party away. But if we go into it that we see this as unconditional in commitment, you know, one of the sad things, and I've mentioned this through the years, one of the real sad things that we have is sometimes we raise up young folk to know the reason for which they can put away a spouse and marry another, yet they don't know how to stay married. Isn't that tragic? They don't realize that commitment has to be there. That you have to go through hard times together with a focus. And by the way, you know, there was a little movie on TV, the kids were watching it, and it depicted a family that was in some dire straits. And Caden said, that's why you talk about things before you get married. We're blessed to be in a culture in which we do that. You do realize that in what we call Bible times, that was not necessarily so. A lot of marriages were arranged. It wasn't the courtship like you and I have, that I get to know somebody and then we do. But you need to make sure, in considering marriage, if you're not already in it, you need to find somebody who has these recognitions, that it is a divine institution, that it is the most important union on earth, that it is unconditional in commitment. You know, the Lord said, as much as lieth in you, be at peace with all men. See, sometimes altercations occur in which I do everything I can to be at peace, but the other person doesn't. There can't be peace. I better marry somebody. I better look for somebody and find somebody who is looking for that same goal in holding that marriage together. If not, I might be in for a long, hard road, because I'm going to be the one who is giving all, and the other one's going to be the one who is taking all. And that's a hard relation to stay in. But many people sadly find themselves in that. But there is no easy out for that. But then lastly, God tells us that marriage is purposeful. So I go into it, and we're going to have another lesson. As a matter of fact, the next lesson on next Sunday night is going to deal with the roles of husband and wife, and it's not going to be what you expect. I can guarantee you that. But there are things within this marriage that we look, and it's got a purpose. And you think about it, and you see in the very beginning, whenever God created the male and female, He created the male first, and He said it's not good for man to be alone. Not good for that male gender to be alone. So I'm going to make a help meet or suitable for him. Now that meet suitable doesn't mean I need to find a woman who's going to cook my food, clean my house, wash my clothes, do all of this. Now there are duties that the woman has in the house, and there are duties that the man has as loving her, that he's going to help her right along with that. But the fact is, I look and I realize that a corresponding part for me, a helpmeet, is somebody who makes me whole. That word alone And Robert, I know he studied a lot in Hebrew. He could probably explain it a whole lot more. But it talks about like a branch that's by itself. I mean, here's the tree, here's a branch. Or it might be the arm out here alone without the body. I look at it in my mind, I can get a pair of shoes. I can put on one shoe and I can clomp around. This isn't working. Why? Because I don't have the other one that goes with it. But whenever I find a left shoe and a right shoe, and I put them both on, I have that pair that makes life easier. Me and my wife. We are the corresponding parts. She has a role in the family, I have a role in the family. But together, we make the whole. We mesh together. We make things right as they should be. And then he says there are also physical needs. You go over to 1 Corinthians 7, and it talks about, in times of distress, as he was discussing, he says, don't defraud one another. In other words, there are physical desires. In the beginning, they were told to go forth and they were to procreate. That's part of marriage. Hebrews 13:5, the marriage bed is undefiled. There is that physical relationship which is good and proper in the right realm. Marriage is the only realm. God says, that man and woman, they have desires, and you fulfill them in the marriage bond. And that's it. I as a man, my wife as a woman, we each have desires. We know that we have a responsibility to the other, and the other has a responsibility to me. And so infidelity really isn't, if the marriage as it should be, infidelity isn't something that's going to be just a plausible option in the mind, as so many in the world look at it as. But it's something that you battle against, and you would never do it, because you keep in mind the preciousness of that marriage, you keep in mind the preciousness of your spouse, you keep in mind the role to each other, and so you fulfill it there. It's only when I lose sight that the problems arise in that realm. And then, you look and you see, in the Bible, you have 3 divinely ordained institutions. You have the home, begun in Genesis 2. Then you have society, that is the governmental order. You find that scattered throughout the Old Testament, and whenever Paul talks to Timothy, he talks about praying for those that are in power, the rulers. And the reason being, we want to have an orderly society. Now some rulers, they do wrong. Need to pray extra hard for them, I guess. But the fact is, society is there. And then the church itself was established on the day of Pentecost. But you look, what's happening to society? We've already talked about it. The family. You want to know why? You read about drug dealers, you read about this and that, you read about drive-by shootings, you see all this. A lot of it can be traced back. There's some people that just turn evil on their own. But a lot of times it's traced back to the family. Kind of like the computer used to be whenever it came to pictures on the screen instead of just letters. It's called WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And you put into it and out it comes. Society is sometimes a mirror of the homes which we have. Then the church. What's happening to the church? Why is it you can go to the church of your choice and get whatever teaching you want in the Kansas City area, and yet it has Church of Christ on the building? Most of it you can trace back to a family. The family that produced these. So the home itself, you look at it, you see it's a divinely ordained institution. It's the most important institution on this earth. It is that union that is unconditional in commitment and is purposeful in design in so many ways, but one of the things is it's really the foundation of everything that we see. As goes the home, so goes the nation. The psalmist said in Psalm 11 and verse 3, if the foundations be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? If we destroy that foundation of the family, why are we shocked at what happens to society and to the church? It is important that we realize how precious the home is. You know, I go and, you buy things and you look, and one of the things that sometimes comes to mind is, well, where's it made? I don't want any of that junk from wherever it may be. You look at it. And so you look, so, okay, who manufactured this? Let me ask you. Ask me. Somebody looks at my home. If I look at my home, can I see a home manufactured, made by God? Good. But most importantly, I can. It's my choice. God made marriage. He gave the instruction manual, and He expects me, if I love Him, to do what He says. And whenever that happens, my home will be a blessing. It'll be blessed. It will be different than what the world sees. And people are going to ask, how do you do that? And with a smile on your face, you're going to say, why don't we sit down and study about that? Because you can show them your home in the pages of this book. Choice we make. But really that begins with self. I can't control all the time what somebody else in my family does. But I can control all the time what I do, who I am. I make the decision to become a child of God. It's ludicrous for me to say, yes, Lord, I'm going to pattern my family after you, but by the way, I'm not going to do what's necessary to become your child. A little bit of a disconnect, isn't there? But the only way that happens, Galatians 3:26 and 27, we're children of God by faith in Christ Jesus, for as many as have been baptized into Christ, have put on Christ. You see, I can say all sorts of things, but unless I do what He says, He's not going to do what He says. I'm not going to be made a child without me doing the things that He commands in order for it to be done. So tonight, is that where I need to start? Or maybe I just need to drop back and look at myself and do some deep insight, some self-examination, and make some changes. Another good thing is, if you need help in that, we're blessed with people that have a home that's admirable. And maybe we need to go to them at times and ask them, how do I handle this? What do I do? If that's a need, whatever it is, we can make our homes after God's pattern. He made them. Let's live it that way as we stand and sing the song of invitation.